We're talking about summer greens this time. Since it is summer, and I know all of you are getting outside and painting outside a lot because weather's better, so we're going to talk about painting greens. Actually, whether you're painting outside or inside doesn't really matter. You still have to deal with greens if you're painting a summer subject or even spring. All the greens can kind of look the same. We can struggle with how to mix those greens. And too often, like with everything else, we try and match what we see, and we forget about the importance of value and color temperature and things like that. And our colors tend to all move towards the middle value, middle temperature, and that's when there's just no variation. So I want to talk about that, how to create more color variation. And it's not a matter of just mixing different colors. I mean, that has something to do with it, obviously, but it also has a lot to do with what I'm going to talk about here in just a minute. So let's go to images. I got to get this fixed up first. I spent an hour doing this. You'd think I'd be all ready. So let's go to images, and I might have to adjust. Not too bad. But having to adjust the images on the screen, they tend to get kind of washed out. The lights kind of get blown out, and you lose all color and value. I see that a little bit in here. This painting actually has a lot of deeper blue in it, but the lighter value just gets washed out. And it could be, no, it's not that. Anyway, still works pretty good. And what I want to do is use a series of summer paintings and talk about how different artists are seeing greens differently so that their paintings have a variety of green to them. They don't just look like all the same green. So this is, I got a few paintings here by Isaac Levitan. And let me see here, sometimes that focuses a bit better. There, I think that is better. Ooh, that worked a lot. So it was a focus issue. You can see now that's a lot stronger color. So I need to focus. I need to get rid of that little bright light up there. One of these days I will figure out how to do this right. But this is Isaac Levitan. He was a Russian painter, 19th century. And I'm going to ignore that because I don't see it on the other screens. And we got a few of his paintings here, a couple that are plein air, outdoor paintings, and a couple that are studio paintings. This, I'm assuming, is plein air. I don't know for sure. I wasn't there when Isaac painted it, but from what I've seen of his tighter work, it looks more studio. This looks more plein air. But and what he has going here is not a lot of variation of green, but he has, the first thing we're going to talk about with greens is the variety of value, getting that dark and light contrast to create a feeling of a variety of greens. Because you know, you can have a ton of different colors in all these greens, the grass, the trees in the background, trees in the foreground. But if the value separation isn't good, it'll all look the same. It'll just flatten out. And he does not have a wide variety of different greens, some, but what he has is a lot of strong, dark, and light green. And that really goes a long way to separating the greens more, giving you a sense of more variety of green. And he's got a lot of muted green in the background, stronger green here, really strong green in the trees. And when we think about green, just right off the bat, there's three greens. Again, all color comes from the color wheel, so the idea of green, when you see something that's green, you have to right away make the decision, is it green or is it yellow green or blue green? Those are the greens from the color wheel. And that's what he's done here. A bit more of a slightly muted yellow green, a bit more of a green in the light on the foliage, bluish green in the shadow. I'm guessing it's more of a black green, using black and some kind of green in there. Doesn't look very bluish green, but that gives the same effect. It's a real cool kind of bluish green, even though it's black. So you have those three right away. And on a sunny day, you don't have a whole lot of just plain green, although Isaac does here. There's a lot of just plain green. But on a sunny day, when the sun hits green, it's no longer just green. It's more of a yellow green. And that's going to suggest the light. Same thing with green that's in the shadow. It's no longer green, it's a blue-green because there's the absence of warmth. So it's going to turn bluer. So right away, you can separate values of green, just light green, dark green, middle green. And if you separate those values, even if you use just one green, even if you paint a summer painting with just Viridian, if you get good value separation between dark and light and halftone, you will have a good variety, because even adding white to green changes the color. So think more value changes between the big shapes of green, you know, the plains, the vertical trees, the flat grass, the slanted hillside of green back in here. If you get those values right, you're going to have a variety of green. Then the other thing too is temperature, which I don't see much of here. He's not using real strong temperature change, although the grass is a lot more yellow-green than the foliage on the tree is. So just that adding more yellow to the green to make it look more sunlit gives you a variety. So right off the bat, just value change and temperature change is going to give you more variety of green. This is another Levitan, and you can see this probably done outside, more brushwork showing, stronger brush strokes. Also the stronger temperature, really blue-green in the shadows, yellow-green in the sunlit areas. This stuff, I don't know what this is, dirt maybe. But that temperature separation, of course, along with the value separation, gives you instant green. He's got three different greens just right in here. Due to value, you know, he's got three different values of green, but he's also got 2 or 3 different colors of green. A real yellowish green, kind of a green, and more blue-green. So just using the 3 greens, separating 3 strong values, and then separating warm and cool, that gives you a ton of color separation. Now this is another Isaac Levitan. Looks more studio. He's using a lot of real tiny brush strokes. But brush stroke aside, he still has the strong value contrast. He still has the more yellow-green in the sunlit areas, bluer green in the shadows, some green, kind of the halftone. So right away using 3 different greens from the color wheel, but also using some lighter greens, some of the yellow greens with orange in them or red in them. So it's kind of a yellow-orange green or a yellow-red green. Sometimes you can have violet green in the shadows. So I tend to think of not just yellow-green, blue-green, green-green. I tend to think in terms of orange-green, red-green, violet-green, any excuse to throw a color in there with green. But I still tend to think first, you know, light or dark or halftone, you know, the value, get that value separation. Is it warm or cool? Is it in the sunlight or in the shadow? Or on a cloudy day, it's a cooler green. Then I think in terms of just adding color for color's sake. Again, some oranges down in here, some reds, even adding complement. You know, he's added some complement, maybe some, I don't know, what do you use, some kind of red in there to mute the bluer green. So you can add the complement also to get a grayer green, which again is a different color. It's still green, but it's a really very green, very muted, so it's going to stand out from like a strong yellow green. You can see the lighter blue greens here from just the kind of the highlights on some of the grass. Even when the sun hits it real strong, sometimes those leaves on certain trees or blades of grass will catch a real bluish tint and will turn a real bluish green. But if you're not thinking in terms of those three greens from the color wheel, or really separating the values, dark, light, and halftone, and if you're not thinking in terms of red, green, orange, green, purple, green, you won't see any difference. Everything will just look green. So it helps to know it. It helps to kind of paint what you know as well as what you see. Now this is still another Levitan. It's got yellow green down in here. Not so much blue green in the shadows this time. It's more of a dark yellow green or just a green green. But he does have that value contrast. And that gives, again, a variety of green. He's got more of a green here, yellow green there, and just kind of a dark green there. Almost not even, there's some blue in there, but not a lot of blue-green. But very strong color, very intense, so it stands out a lot more. And that really separates from these kind of reddish orange greens on either side. Very symmetrical composition. He's got that tree kind of dead center, equal space on either side, just about. And on either side, he's got those real orange, red-orange greens in there. Really focuses on that tree for sure. Now, this is not a Levitan, staying with Russian artists here. This is Ivan Shishkin. He was another Russian painter. I'm going to zoom in just a bit so you can see a bit more. Very tight painting. I'm assuming studio. I can't imagine being outside. All the dandelions down in here. All the detail. No brushwork to speak of. His brushwork is kind of leveled out with a lot of medium, probably thin paint, because he doesn't want any brush strokes to show. Which, I have no desire to paint this way, but I love looking at this painting. Really nice painting. But beside the point here, thinking of variety of green, his main difference here is this kind of darker green to yellow green in the foliage, lighter, more yellow green on the grass, and that gives instant separation right away. And if we zoomed in a lot closer, you'd see some more ochre greens, kind of a variety of green, but a lot of blue-green in the shadows. And again, you probably use more black than blue on these greens. This is a 19th century, mid to late 19th century. Very tight, but again, that simple separation of yellow green to blue green gives good color separation. Also, introducing anything of other colors, like the color of the trunk, kind of a yellow-orange trunk with a darker kind of muted violet on the shadow of the trunk, the dirt and the grass, the rock, even the sky poking through. Those different colors help break up the green a little bit. So be conscious of having enough color variation of other things that aren't even green. I wanted to put this in here in case I forgot, which I tend to do at the end of these. At the end of this, if you want to get this this pamphlet on greens, kind of the same thing I talked about here, some different images, some step-by-step painting, and just talking about how I'm separating greens in terms of value and temperature. I'll have a link at the end of the video after it's posted. It's posted about 5-10 minutes later. And I'll have a link there that you can click on that link and you can just download this PDF. Kind of notes about what I'm talking about now and some other examples as well. but I'll forget that if I don't mention it now. Now this is a John Folensby, early 20th century, early to mid. He was a student of John Carlson. And a lot of broken color, a lot of thick paint, and a lot of strong light yellow-green for the sunlit areas and darker blue-green for the shadows. But then he goes back into the lighter yellow-green, adds some green. I don't know if they had permanent green light back then. Some of this looks like just straight permanent green light that he's added some white to, some not. But he's got orange greens in here, some yellow greens, red greens. Just any excuse for a different color sometimes is all you need. Don't think that you have to always look and find a color to put in there. Zoom in a little bit. Well, I can't make it come up anymore. But you can zoom in and see some of those more yellow greens, orange greens, some red greens down in there in the grass. Not so much in the trees. The foliage generally is going to be darker than the grass in the sunlight. Also in the shadow. The shadow will be darker than the shadow on the flat plane because they're two different planes. Trees a vertical plane, the grass is more flat plane, so you're going to have lighter shadows on the ground and lighter lights on the ground in the tree. But you can also, you can go with different greens on your palette. He's got more, I would guess, synthetic greens here, like permanent green light. I don't know if they even had those back then, or phthalos. Definitely had cadmium, so it might be a lot more. I don't know if they have cadmium green, but cad yellow with maybe cobalt. So a lot of different ways of seeing greens in terms of the different blues you use too. Most of the greens I mix come from some kind of blue and yellow. Mostly ultramarine blue and yellow, but I can get a different green using phthalo blue or cerulean blue and yellow. You can use cobalt blue, which I don't use, and yellow. That gives you a different green. So if you just want a variety of greens by using different colors, it's better to go with blue and yellow and just change up the blues. And viridian and yellow also makes a real strong green. It's more of a synthetic looking green. It doesn't look real natural. Ultramarine blue and cad yellow makes a good basic green, like right there. Because ultramarine has a little bit of red in it. It's a little bit of a reddish or a blue violet. And that creates a slightly more muted green, yellow green, green, blue green. And it just looks a bit more natural. Where viridian and cad yellow looks a little more unnatural, which is okay. If I want to really push the colors, I think like John Folensby did here. These aren't real natural looking greens, but they're real effective. So it's not that your painting has to look real natural unless that's your goal. And it's not always my goal. I will use some synthetic looking colors just to make things pop a bit more. But I tend to stick with the same colors on my palette. I don't go by permanent green light. Gosh, I can't even think of other greens. Hooker's green, that might be just watercolor. Verde green, I can't think of what the other greens are right now, but I tend not to get those. I do have viridian, but I tend not to use viridian for green foliage and grass unless it's just an accent. I tend to use viridian in the sky for kind of a bluish green to mix violets. Viridian and alizarin makes a real strong violet. But this is an Alfred Sicily, and you can see strong value contrast between the green of the trees, green of the grass, a lot more yellow, yellow-orange color of green in the grass, and more greens, muted greens, lighter, darker greens. And he was using some black here too instead of so much blue in the greens. So not too much blue-green, more of a black-green, but a lot of variation of green. And adding the complement, you can see where he's added a little bit of the complement where this green gets kind of grayish, and where it's stronger, not as much. Again, that's Alfred Sicily. When I was in Chicago, the museum there had a lot of Alfred Sicilies. They were really good ones. A lot of times museums will have a lot of paintings of an artist, and Not all of them are very good, but his were just really good. He was my favorite painter for a long time. Another Alfred Sicily. Again, a lot of variation. First, always think first value, the dark and light green. A little bit bluer, a little bit more yellow. And then there's oranges and reds in there. You can see the oranges kind of popping out. And you can scrub those oranges in a bit more, or reds or violets or whatever color you're scrubbing into your green. Or you can just put them down and let them sit next to a green. You don't always have to scrub them in. They can kind of sit side by side and let the viewer's eye kind of blend them a little bit. But they do have to be somewhat the same value. All these different variations of greens in here and over in here, they're all real close to the same value. Same thing in the shadow. There's a little value change in the shadow, a little darker, slightly lighter, but real close to the same value. And he used, I'm guessing, black here as well, because some of these darks don't have any color in them. They just go kind of a black green, whether it's black with a little bit of yellow or whatever it is. But it still works. It's a good example that you can use black in your landscape and still get a lot of atmosphere, because black can kill the atmosphere sometimes, but not so with Alfred. He knew what he was doing. Now, this is a William Wendt, California painter, 20th century, and you can see of course, the value change right off the bat. Darker shadow, lighter grass here in the sunlight, bluer in the distance, still a light and dark, not as much contrast, but light and dark in the foreground, a little bluer in the shadow, a lot more yellow, yellow-orange in the sunlit yellow-green grass. Now the other thing is, after laying in a strong yellow-green like this, sometimes you can do mixing right on the canvas, like there's some red, light red here that scrub right on top of the green. You don't mix it on the palette. You just pick up your same value of red or red-orange, wipe most of it off the brush, and kind of scrub it into the green right on the canvas. And that gives you a little more variation. Sometimes when we blend everything on the palette, you can blend a color kind of flat. So if you do some blending on the canvas, it doesn't mix as much and you get more color variation. You see a lot of blue-green and just green in the shadow here. A little bit of variation of that. Looks like a little purple-green up in here. And then you introduce the dirt and the rocks, and that gives you a lot of color variation. But if you don't have that value variation of the greens, it doesn't matter what you do. You can add all kinds of color in there. If your values aren't right, the colors won't make any impact. It's kind of like a broken record. It's always the same thing. It's always values. Even if I'm just trying to get variations of green, it's that variation of different values of green first that's most important. Now this is another William Wendt. Very strong color. Looks like straight from the tube, ultramarine, a little bit of white in it. Very strong blues to blue-greens here in the cliffs. Strong greens here. Really nice painting. You can see, the hills are green, even though it might be more ochre in here than anything else, or more cad yellow in here than anything else. Everything is still a green. There's enough yellow and blue in here, enough yellow and blue way back here that this is still green, but it's a very, very bluish green. Not as much yellow here. Maybe some violet scrubbed in as well. And these greens are very, very yellow green. Almost all yellow, maybe a tiny bit of blue. And then, of course, some oranges, some reds in there. So, thinking first in terms of blue-green, yellow-green, green-green. Then start thinking in terms of orange-green, red-green, purple-green, really muted green with a complement, or really strong green without any complement, like some of the greens down in here. This has a few strokes of some green that's real strong in there. And real strong color, like right in here and the blue water, I think, is a lot more effective when you also have a lot of muted color around it. Like in these hills, there's some muted grayer colors, in the shadow. That makes the stronger color a lot more effective. Kind of zoom through these a bit more. Again, William Wendt, strong value separation. And you can always have more color when you have simpler shapes. And he really simplifies the shapes of these trees. Pays more attention to the outline shape, kind of the form shape of the tree, because there's no detail to speak of, and there's only two values, simple, dark, and light. It's more that overall outline shape of the tree that gives it an interesting look. It's not necessarily the color. But with that strong value contrast, that gives a variety of green that's, doesn't need a whole lot more. A lot more variety down in here with a lot more of the complement. This is more yellow-green. The complement of yellow-green is crimson. So getting alizarin crimson, roughly the same value, and mixing it in a little bit with the yellow-green or putting it on by itself right on top of the canvas, or the color on the canvas, you get that variation. But when you add the different colors into these greens on the canvas, they have to be the right value. You can maybe get away with the value not being quite as close if you're going to do the mixing on the palette. But if I mix right on the canvas, I want the same value that I'm mixing into. So if I want to break up this shadow with more blues, violets, red violet, I'm going to make them the same value as this shadow. A lot of times a hair lighter. Sometimes the same value gets kind of heavy and dark looking. So I will get it just a hair lighter in the shadows. Because if I do get it the wrong value, if I get a darker value in this light green of a different color I want to blend in there, it's going to get muddy. It's not going to work as well. And if I get too much, too, it's going to take over. I don't want to take over this green. I just want to affect it a little bit with some different green. Now this is Arthur Streeton. He was a, I'm going to do this again and see what, he was a Australian painter. Very high key, although in his high key colors in the light area, he goes really dark in some of these darks. So his shadows, deep shadows aren't necessarily a high key, but these lights are, and you can see it's a green hillside here, but he's got, yellow-green first, probably, orange-green, there's some red in there, probably alizarin, some blue over here, some ochre, some orange, so a lot of variation of color, but it's still a green overall. Of course, this is Australia. It looks like it's in a really dry desert part of Australia. And these spots of dirt, which are real light, also help break up the green. Even though they're not green, they do help vary the green quite a bit. So always think about what's in there. Dirt is a good green breaker-upper. It just really breaks up green. If you have a whole field of green grass, get some patches of dirt in there. This is another Arthur Streeton. I zoomed in a little bit so you can see more of the strong yellow-green. It doesn't carry as well on the in Facebook as it does on my computer screen, but there's some lighter kind of red oranges in here to break it up. Same thing in here. And then he goes to some stronger yellow greens to green, and then some greens with a little bit of the complement that gets a little grayer here. So, and a lot of times you can take some of that lighter complement color and just scrub it right into the canvas and get some instant variation. And in this case, kind of a pulled back view of a wide vista. You can just scrub it around kind of haphazardly to get some muted grayer greens and leave some of the stronger greens showing. But I can still have a very greenish painting where the grass is green, all the trees are green, mountains are green. But by using value change and temperature change, I can come up with as much color variation as I need. I mean, these are trees back in here, even though the mountains back in here are pretty much all blue. It is a bluish green. Now this is a Karl Moll, M-O-L-L. He was an Austrian painter, really good painter, good still life painter, very underrated. He was in Vienna when the Soviet Union was coming in, and he thought that they were all doomed from the Soviet Union, so he committed suicide, and wasn't very old either. But really a good painter. Kind of a downer note on him when we're looking at how good his paintings are, but really nice variation of greens in here. He's got, first right off the bat, strong light green, strong dark green. There's good variation right there. Then he's got yellow green, and then that highlight green, which almost turns more blue-green, kind of like white and viridian. It's still warm because he started with the yellow-green and then added the slightly cooler, real light blue-green on top. And the yellow-green underneath keeps it from getting too cool. You can see it in the leaves here. And he used real thick paint. I mean, he just piled it on like he had so much excess paint he didn't know what to do with. So some of these highlights in these warmer sunlit greens really turn to kind of a bluish green. You can see them also in here. You get real strong highlights. If you're looking at your phone, maybe you can't see it as well. But really good painter. Everything back in here, it's all green. But it's purple green, green green, blue green. There's some red greens. Just a really big variety, but they're all cool compared to what's up front in the sunlight. Everything's a comparison. So this is a green painting, but he's got so much variation in there. It's very colorful looking. And the water and the houses and the sidewalk, of course, and the trunks help break it up quite a bit. Now this is a Hansen put-off. And here all the greens are pretty much in the shadow. And there's greens back in here, but because of the low light in the evening, the greens disappear. They turn into that red-orange, kind of warm pink color that you get in the evening. But all the greens in here, again, are all cool. So he's got a really bluish green, just blue. And you put blue next to a lot of blue-green. That blue looks greenish. And some muted greens, some red, darker red, red-orange greens. A lot of variation, even though it's all a cool, somewhat bluish green. He varies it quite a bit, especially where the sun starts hitting up here. Not much yellow-green. It's more of that, again, that reddish-orange green. Some yellow-green right there. It's another Hansen put-off. Really nice greens in here. Again, first separated by dark and light, warm and cool. And you can see how much darker and how much greener the foliage is in the sunlight than the grass in the sunlight. They're both in the sunlight, but this is so much darker. And this is so much more yellow, and this has more blue in it, and a lot more red and red-orange in it. That gives it that kind of orange-green color, which I think that orange in the green makes it look more sunlit, even though it's not as light and as yellow as the green grass. That orange makes it look more sunlit, and it's that comparison of the orange-green with this more blue-green here. And it's some violets in that blue-green also. Now he also uses the opportunity of the different colors of the shrubbery, the dirt, the roofs, and the pads of dirt leading back. I mean, there's a lot of variation of other objects besides green, but there's so much green in here, but he breaks it up nicely. And I don't know if these patches on the hills were that red. They may not have been, and it doesn't matter. He made it that red. I mean, he's the artist. He's not a camera. So, you know, as long as it works in terms of composition and value, go for whatever color you want. If your painting needs more color variation, just put another color in there just for the sake of color. It doesn't have to be there. I mean, still painting realism. We're still trying to be realistic. We're just not trying to be camera-like. So another Hansen put off. Again, you can see the variations. Even though this is all sunlit in here, some blue-green. But that blue-green doesn't look too much like the lack of sunlight because there's so much yellow-green and orange-green around it. And again, the trees, the sunlit foliage on the trees, a lot darker than the sunlit grass. And if you can keep those two separate, that goes a long way to give you more variety and more shape and depth in your painting. This is a T.C. Steele. He was an American painter. Where was he? Indiana, I think. Late 1800s. But again, variety of bluish greens, blue violets, kind of gray colors in the background. But it's all green. I mean, it still looks like a green painting. And the greens in the trees are totally different from the greens in the grass. Greens in the grass are more green to yellow-green. Greens in the trees are more muted green. Get this thing to hold still. To green with a darker green. I think you used more black than blue in these dark greens because they don't have as much atmosphere to them, but really strong. And that value contrast of these background darks against these middle ground tree darks. A lot of separation, which creates a lot of depth. And that's what makes this painting so interesting. Why do I keep doing that? Is the depth, that separation of darks in the background compared to darks in the foreground. A lot of variation of green in the grass. Blue-green, yellow-green, green-green. Maybe some different blues he mixed with yellows to get a variety of greens. But have a good idea of the values before you start just throwing in different greens or using different blues to come up with different greens. Get your values right first. Even if you just do a black and white first to get the values right. This is a T.C. Steele also. Really good painter. And using the flowers here and the house to really offset the green, because there's not a lot of variety in the greens, but he doesn't need as much. He does have the difference in value of the foliage on the tree compared to the value of the green in the grass. But the reds and the flowers and the yellows and the gray and the house, and the house is gray, but it has to be a warm gray in the sunlight, orange with a little blue in the sunlight, and cooler gray in the shadow, blue with just a little orange. I mean, he might have used black, who knows. But even still, it's black with some kind of warm color, ochre, orange, yellow, and then black in here with some kind of warm color. Since most of us don't use black anymore, we use blue. That's how you'd come up with those grays, blue and orange. There's a face right there. I had never noticed that before. Kind of creepy looking, but nice painting aside from that face. This is a John Enking, John Joseph Enking, if you want to look him up online. Really strong impressionist painter, American. He started out as a tonalist, very tonal, not much color, more value oriented, and really went to strong color. But you can see a lot of variation of more just yellow-orange in here than even green. Still a summer day. It's still green grass, but he's pushed that green grass to more yellow-orange because he wanted to. Because nobody could tell him he couldn't do that. And the foliage up here, really dark. Probably not as dark as the photograph shows, but really dark, bluer, more muted greens to really separate from the lighter, warmer greens. Got a few more here. This is another John Enking, really good painter. This one was at the Metropolitan or not. I have a couple of his at the Metropolitan, which are really good. Now, in the on Photoshop, this area looks like it's sunlit, but it's not. It's in shadow. The sunlight is hitting here, and it's hitting in these rocks, and it's bouncing into that shadow. It really reads as sunlight over here on Facebook, but it's not, just reflected light. Reflected light, I think. Pretty sure it is. At least that reads that way to me. But you can see the variation of green, and this might be a bit more towards fall. He's got some orange leaves up here, more yellow. But even if it is summer, you know, stick an orange tree in there just to give some variation. You know, it could be dead leaves because it's a dry summer. But, you know, don't feel so tied to what you're looking at that you can't get more variety in there. Same thing down below, just for the, you know, he's got a lot of reds and red oranges and violets down in here, and it just gives more variation to the green. So he's starting with what he sees, and he's finishing up with what he knows and what he wants in the painting. More variety of color. There's not a ton of variety and value in here. It's more that color variation that makes it look real busy. It is a busy painting, but not as busy as it looks because his values are so good. This is also another John Enking. And you can see that those highlights on leaves sometimes get real cool looking because they get so light that the color gets kind of washed out, and that cools them down. And contrast that with more yellow leaves. Even though I think this is very summer, he pushed these really yellow because he can. Same thing at the background, more blues in the shadow. So you can see a lot of variation going on. So that's pretty much it. Again, I want to remind you, I'll have a post at the end of the video after it takes about 5 minutes to post. If you want this, it just has some of the notes that I've been kind of goes over what I've just said with a few different images to kind of show the same thing. So I'm going to look real quick, see if there's any questions. I didn't stop and look at questions. Not that there has to be, but if any popped up, I'd like to answer them. Yes, hot Tucson, Jennifer. It is hot today, but that's why I'm inside. I do plan on getting outside a lot more in the summer. I haven't been before. You just have to do it like at 5 in the morning because the sun is up by then. So okay. Hi, Sandra. Good to see you. Beverly. All right. Oh, Betty had a question about black with greens, and that was early on. You know, this is Isaac Levitan, and I'm assuming that's black. That sure looks black to me. In the 19th century, they didn't use blue as much or as often, especially in shadows. But it's still effective because he has good values in his paintings. It does cut down on the atmosphere, so it's black and I don't know, maybe chrome green, or it could be black with a little bit of chrome yellow to make a real dark green. I will sometimes use black as an exercise for my blue, so I don't necessarily use black on a palette to darken everything. I think that's the wrong use of black. If I have black on the palette, it's in the place of blue. So blue or black and cad yellow light makes a real nice green. Muted, but a real nice green. And black and alizarin crimson and white makes a real nice muted violet. And within the picture frame, if I'm using black as my blue in the shadows, and I use just straight black and white for a blue sky, it actually looks blue. Obviously very muted, but within the picture frame, within the four edges of the picture, it will look very blue. That's why these shadows can look almost kind of, you know, very, very green, even though they're probably just black. Because there's so much green in there, it just kind of looks black. If there is black in here, there's not very much, or he's added white to it, so it's not as dark. So yeah, I don't recommend using black other than as an exercise when you use just a limited palette of red, yellow, blue, and you replace the blue with the black. Okay, Daniel has a question on the second William Went. What keeps the back hill from coming forward with the darker color in the mountain? So let me go to second. So here's the first William Went, and here's the second. Okay, what keeps the black hill from coming forward with the darker, cooler mountain in front? I don't know if you're thinking about this hill, Daniel. I mean, very blue. This is a little bit warmer blue-green because there's sunlight on it. This one's in the shadow, so it's a little bluer. But this is pretty blue in here, and you know it's not going to go. Even though blue recedes, this is not going to recede back because it's so dark. So I can have real bluish color in front, but it has to be a lot darker than the bluish color in the back for it to stay up front. He just doesn't add any color to these blues in here. And again, I'll have the link down below after it's posted if you want the PDF that kind of goes with this. We will talk to you later.